Hey, what's going on, everybody? Hope you are well. I made an offer on a property recently, and the response that I got from the real estate agent was actually pretty surprising. In fact, it was kind of comical in a sense, and I'm going to share that with you here today because I do think that it speaks to where we are in the housing market and some of the bifurcation that we're still seeing between home sellers and home buyers. And so I'm going to get into that story and share it with you. But before we do, I want to give you a little bit of background on how I actually make these offers so that you understand I'm not just pulling a number out of a hat. I'm actually doing it based on math and based on the actual local market. So I've developed what we would call a buy box. And even though I've done this for several years, it's something that I heard defined on the YouTube channel, One Rental at a Time. Great channel. If you haven't heard of it, I'll go ahead and link to it in the show notes. You should give it a follow. He talks about building a buy box all the time. And what this is basically just a framework in which you locate property and make offers. So it defines your criteria so that you could take the emotion out of the offer and you're actually basing it on maybe like an internal rate of return or a cash on cash return, or you're just defining specifically what you're looking for. Anyway, so what I'm looking for in this particular market is your average starter home. So roughly 1,500 square feet, at least 3 beds, 2 baths, 2-car garage, single store if we can. And I do want a little bit of an oversized lot because I want the ability to maybe have RV access or potentially the ability to build an ADU, an additional dwelling unit, down the road. And by the way, I'm looking in a very specific market, like literally the radius is probably a 1/4 mile. So anything that pops up that fits that criteria, which is most of the homes in this tract development, will come up and hit my radar, and then I actually go and look on them. In fact, I've offered on several of these properties out there. And to be clear, I am looking for a good deal. So some of my offers that I make could be construed as maybe lowball. But anyway, I finally found a property that checked the majority of these boxes. And I'm looking at purchasing a home to live in, at least initially for the first couple years, but with the intention of eventually turning that into a rental property. And so this property fit the bill for a couple of reasons. First, it kind of checked all the boxes on the buy box. But second, and maybe most important, is that there was a value add component to it. Like the bones of the property were good. I think the roof was newer. I think the heating and air had been redone, but the interior needed, a little bit of cosmetic work and rehabs. In addition to that, it had a pretty nice size yard where you could put an RV or maybe even build a pool or an ADU, kind of like I was talking about. So being as how I understood and knew that market really well, I just dug in and did the actual math. There were 2 recent sales right within the same neighborhood, literally like a couple blocks away. And so those homes had sold for roughly about $415 a square foot. In fact, I had been in each and every single one of those homes, so I understood the condition. I knew one of them was immaculate inside and out, and then I knew the other needed some work, needed some cosmetic work and needed a roof and things like that. And on top of that, I was able to actually look in the MLS notes, and what they sold for actually incorporated closing cost credits, at least on one of them. It was like 12 grand in closing cost credits. And so what I did is I calculated the average price per square foot based on those sales. And those closed sales worked out to an average price per square foot around $415. And so this subject property, the one that I actually offered on, all I did was took the average price per square foot and then I multiplied it by the square footage. And this property was a little bit smaller. And so when you did the calculation, you found out that the listing price versus what, the quote unquote actual value is based on average price per square foot was about a $50,000 difference. So in other words, like the property was listed around 600 and based on the comps, it was really only worth about 550. And that's just doing some basic math. Now, in addition to that, the condition, at least inside, was a little worse. So I adjusted slightly for that by requesting a $10,000 seller credit. So my offer in total was about 60 grand less. And I didn't really go much further than that. Initially, I kind of wanted to because I understand really what it will take to get some of that work done. And it will be not only time, but a significant cost component to that as well. And anyway, as long as I could get it for the average price per square foot or close to it and start the conversation, I think I'd be happy with that. The response that I got was really interesting. And granted, this property had only been on the market a couple of days, whereas those other properties that had recently closed, one of them had been on the market for about 8 months before it closed, and the other was on the market for about 90 days, so 3 months. And so coming out of the gate really hot with an offer, maybe that's part of the reason why I got this response. But when you're making offers like this, where you're gonna be going significantly under the actual list price, you gotta go in with the mindset and the understanding that you will get a ton of rejection. You're gonna have to make a lot of offers, and in certain cases, you might offend the sellers or even insult them, which of course is not the intent. The intent is actually really to open up the conversation and find out, who's motivated, who needs to sell, because you want to get a really great deal. So anyway, I kicked out the offer. I had one conversation with the agent and we exchanged a few texts. And then once I made the offer, I tried to get in touch but couldn't. And so we were just communicating via text. But I submitted the offer, and this agent said, "Oh, I haven't gotten it yet." And I suggested, "Well, check your spam folder because maybe it's in there." And then eventually he got back to me, "Oh, I found it. It was in my spam folder, which is probably a really good place for it." That was the response that I got. And anyway, it sort of made me laugh, but it kind of struck a nerve with me because I thought, wow, I know you didn't have any other offer in hand. I took the time and the energy and effort to at least write an offer. I get it. The home had only been on the market for a couple days, so it's understandable that you get a lot of pushback. But the intention was to open up the conversation, see how motivated they were, and maybe get a counteroffer. Instead, this agent got back to me a couple hours later and sort of bagged on every aspect of my offer. Not just the price, but also the terms, which was really kind of off-putting to me. Now, I just didn't take it personal because I felt like I had actually made a reasonable offer. And by the way, I would have actually entertained a counter. And so I just said, "Hey, thank you, no worries." And I kind of moved on with my day. But anyway, this is why it's funny, and this is why I'm making this video, is because that agent didn't want to hear what I had to say, didn't take the time to call me, basically just flat out rejected it with very little input or effort or anything at all. In fact, almost kind of went out of the way to maybe insult me slightly or just push back really hard. And I thought, wow, this is kind of a disservice to the seller. But whatever, to each his own, no big deal. Property's been sitting on the market now for a couple weeks, and guess what just happened? Hasn't gotten into contract, and I got a notification on my phone that the purchase price has been reduced by $25,000. So now there's really only a gap of about 25-30 grand between the original offer that I made after the first weekend and where they are currently listed. It was funny because it speaks to where we are in the market. And if you guys follow Jason Hartman, he has a saying, and that is that sellers are always looking out the rear view mirror while home buyers are looking straight out in front of the windshield. And I think that rings true because there is still this major power struggle between buyers and sellers. And it makes sense because over the last couple years, we've been supply constrained. So sellers have basically got to name their price and name their terms, essentially being able to have their cake and eat it too. Well, buyers are now starting to take back a little bit of that control as we deal with the affordability issues here in the housing market. And so one major takeaway that is important to understand is that in order to sell a piece of property, it takes a willing buyer and a willing seller, and it might be wise for sellers as things start to change like they are now is to have the right expectations that they may not be able to get their price and their terms. They might have to bend in one area or the other. Now, that's not the case across the board. It's just some little anecdotal piece of evidence that I'm starting to see unfold here in the housing market today. Anyway, if this story resonates with you, if you're interested in me doing a follow-up to see what actually happens with this property, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And I'll do my best to keep you updated along the way. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day. We'll see you on the next video. Take care.